Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in the crystal chamber of the Galactic Council Station, watching the familiar dance of political theater unfold before her. The massive circular room stretched up into darkness above, with delegates from dozens of species arranged in tiers that seemed to go on forever. At the center, the Cathari representative stood at the speaking podium, his forearms gesturing dismissively as he spoke. The human claim to the Kepler 442 system lacks merit, Ambassador Thrixavel announced, his metallic voice echoing through the chamber. Their settlement predates proper galactic registration by only 3 cycles. The Hegemony's claim is clearly superior, having been filed through proper channels. Elena felt her jaw clench. 3 cycles was 15 Earth years. 15 years of human families building homes, farming alien soil, and creating communities. The Zephyrian Hegemony had filed their claim 6 months ago from the comfort of their homeworld, never having set foot on Kepler 442 around the chamber. Other delegates nodded in agreement or showed their species equivalent of approval. The Valthek Confederation's representative, a floating jellyfish-like creature in a mobility suit, pulsed with soft blue light. The ethereal collective's envoy, barely visible in their energy form, flickered in what Elena had learned to recognize as satisfaction. This was the 15th time in 3 years. 15 times that human colonies had been relocated for the greater good of galactic peace. 15 times that Elena had stood before this council, presenting evidence, making arguments, pleading for justice. Each time the response was the same: lengthy deliberations that resulted in small compensations while humans lost their homes. The worst part was not the losing. Elena had been a lawyer before becoming a diplomat. She understood that not every case could be won. The worst part was the barely concealed contempt in the aliens' voices when they spoke about humanity. They saw humans as the new kids on the galactic block, barely worth considering. The Council recognizes the economic hardship this may cause the human settlers, Thrixavel continued, his tone suggesting he found their hardship mildly amusing. We recommend a compensation of 12,000 galactic credits per displaced family. 12,000 credits. Elena did the math in her head. That was enough to buy passage off-world and maybe rent a small apartment on a core world for 6 months. These families had invested their life savings into their new homes. Elena activated her speaking light and stood. The chamber fell quiet as recognition protocols acknowledged her request to address the council. Honored delegates, she began, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. Humanity respectfully requests that the council consider the precedent being set here. If established settlements can be displaced by retroactive claims, then no colony in the galaxy is truly secure. A few murmurs ran through the chamber. The Aquarian delegate, a sleek humanoid with gills instead of ears, spoke up. Ambassador Vasquez raises a valid point. Perhaps we should review the Colonial Charter guidelines. That would require a subcommittee, replied the Cathari delegate. Such matters take time to properly consider. Time. Always more time. Elena had heard this excuse so many times she could recite it perfectly in 17 different galactic languages. While the council debated and formed committees, human families were forced from their homes. How long would such a review take? Elena asked. These matters cannot be rushed, Thrixavel replied. Perhaps 8 to 10 cycles for a thorough examination. 8 to 10 cycles. 40 to 50 Earth years. Elena's grandchildren might see the results of that committee if they were lucky. The session continued for another 4 hours. Elena presented her evidence. Soil samples showing human agricultural improvements, infrastructure reports detailing the hospitals and schools built by the colonists, economic data proving the settlement's viability. Each piece of evidence was acknowledged politely and set aside for further consideration. When the session finally ended, Elena walked slowly back to the human embassy section. The corridors of the station were beautiful, with flowing designs that seemed to shift and change as she moved. Every surface was perfectly clean, every system running smoothly. It was a marvel of galactic cooperation and technology. It was also a prison of bureaucracy and contempt. Elena's assistant, David Chen, was waiting for her in the embassy's main office. His expression told her he had been watching the proceedings from the diplomatic feed. How bad? He asked. They awarded the system to the Hegemony, Elena replied, sinking into her chair. Compensation of 12,000 per family. David shook his head. That won't even cover transport costs back to Earth for most of them. Elena stared out the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, 15,000 human colonists were about to learn they were homeless again. Somewhere else, Zephyrian corporate teams were probably already loading ships with mining equipment. "There's something else," David said quietly. "Priority message from Earth came in an hour ago." Elena took the encrypted datapad and read the message. As she read, her face went pale. "What is it?" David asked. Elena set down the pad carefully. "The Hegemony has announced their intention to claim mining rights to the asteroid belt in the Sol system." "What?" "That's insane. They can't claim territory in humanity's home system. They're saying the asteroid belt doesn't technically fall under Earth's colonial charter, same logic they used for Kepler 442. Elena stood up and walked to the window again. "They want the rare Earth deposits for their expansion fleet." David joined her at the window. "What's Earth's response?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching a Cathari cargo ship dock at one of the station's many ports. "The Security Council is meeting in emergency session, but we all know how this will go. The Council will form a committee. The Hegemony will present their legal arguments. In 5 years, they'll award mining rights to the aliens and offer humanity a consulting fee. So what do we do?" Elena thought about the 15,000 families about to be displaced from Kepler 442. She thought about the asteroid miners in Sol system who had spent generations working those rocks. She thought about the dozens of other human colonies that lived in constant fear of alien legal challenges. She thought about 50 years of diplomatic patience and compromise. 50 years of being the reasonable ones, the flexible ones, the ones willing to work within the system. And what had it gotten humanity? A reputation as pushovers who would accept any insult as long as it came with proper paperwork. Elena walked to her desk and opened a secure communication channel to Earth. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. What she was about to do would change everything. There would be no going back, but maybe that was exactly what humanity needed. She typed a single line. "Protocol Omega. Humanity withdraws from all galactic accords effective immediately." She sent the message and then turned to David. "Pack everything. We're going home. What about our diplomatic status? Our trade agreements? Our colonial rights?" Elena looked out at the stars one more time. "David, for 50 years we've played by their rules and gotten nothing but contempt in return. Maybe it's time they learned what happens when humanity stops being reasonable." The message would reach Earth in 6 hours. By tomorrow, the galaxy would discover what humanity had been building, while the aliens were busy with their politics and bureaucracy. Elena smiled for the first time in months. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was not their adaptability or their diplomacy. It was their willingness to walk away from a rigged game and start their own. The first sign that something was wrong came at 800 station time, exactly 48 hours after Ambassador Vasquez had sent her message to Earth. Security Chief Glextar of the Galactic Council Station was reviewing the morning reports when his assistant approached with a puzzled expression. The Hiraki officer's tentacles twitched nervously as he handed over a datapad. "Sir, we have a situation. All human diplomatic staff have checked out of their quarters. The entire embassy section is empty." Glextar frowned, his 6 eyes focusing on the report. "Checked out? All of them? When?" "Between 200 and 400 this morning. They left no forwarding information, just standard departure protocols. This was unusual, but not unheard of. Sometimes diplomatic missions were recalled suddenly. But as the hours passed, more reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Every human embassy, trade office, and cultural center had gone silent overnight. On the Cathari homeworld, Trade Minister Crixtel discovered that the human commercial district was completely empty. The offices that had buzzed with activity for decades now stood vacant, with nothing but basic furniture left behind. Even stranger, the humans had taken time to properly cancel all contracts and pay final bills before disappearing. The Valthek Confederation faced a more immediate crisis. Their primary medical facility on Valthek Prime had run out of human-manufactured neural processors. The delicate devices were essential for treating their species' unique brain chemistry, and no other race in the galaxy could produce them. When Confederation officials tried to contact the human suppliers, they found nothing but automated messages stating that all contracts had been terminated. At first, most galactic leaders assumed this was a temporary protest. Humans were known for their emotional responses to political setbacks. Surely they would return to the negotiating table within a few days. But days turned into weeks, and the silence from humanity deepened. Captain Vorthak of the Yao Zephyrian Hegemony was commanding a mining expedition to claim the asteroid belt in the Sol system when he encountered the first hint of what humanity had really been doing. His fleet of 12 heavy cruisers dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, expecting to find the usual collection of primitive human settlements and mining stations. Instead, they found nothing. The asteroid belt, which had been home to over 1 million human miners and their families, was completely empty. Every mining station, every habitat, every ship had vanished. Even the communication beacons were gone. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the inner system." "Show me," Vorthak ordered. The main screen displayed the Sol system, with energy readings highlighted in red. Mars, which their intelligence reports described as a minor human colony world, was showing industrial output readings that rivaled the Hegemony's primary manufacturing worlds. "That can't be right," Vorthak muttered. "Run the scans again." The second scan confirmed the first. Mars had been transformed into something the Hegemony had never seen before. The energy output suggested massive shipyards and manufacturing facilities, far beyond what they thought human technology could achieve. Even more disturbing were the readings from Luna, Earth's moon. The entire surface appeared to be covered with artificial structures, and energy signatures indicated weapons systems that dwarfed anything in the Hegemony fleet. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission." "From whom?" "Unknown source. Text only. The Sol system is closed to foreign vessels." "Depart immediately," Vorthak laughed. "Closed by whose authority?" He never received an answer to that question. His fleet's approach toward the inner system was met by something that appeared on their sensors like a solid wall of contacts. Hundreds of ships, all of unknown design, moved to intercept them. The Hegemony fleet retreated without firing a shot. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the absence of human trade was causing economic chaos. The Ethereal Collective's expansion fleet found their ships breaking down in deep space. Human-engineered fusion cores had been quietly powering half the galaxy's starships for the past 30 years. Now those replacement parts were nowhere to be found. The Aquarian Republic's food distribution network collapsed when human agricultural supplements stopped arriving. The supplements, which boosted crop yields by 300%, had become essential to feeding the Republic's population. Even the mighty Kethari Confederation discovered their vulnerability. Their newest generation of warships relied on human-designed quantum processors for their targeting systems. Without replacement components, their entire fleet would be reduced to scrap metal within a year. Ambassador Thrixavel, the same Kethari who had dismissed humanity's territorial claims just weeks earlier, found himself in the embarrassing position of trying to contact an empty human embassy. His messages went unanswered. His formal diplomatic protests were returned by automated systems. For the first time in his career, Thrixavel was forced to admit that the Confederation needed something from the species he had spent decades dismissing as primitive. Newcomers. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to address the crisis. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Chamber, but the human section remained conspicuously empty. "This is clearly a violation of galactic trade agreements," declared the Valtech representative, his jellyfish-like form pulsing with agitated colors. "Humanity cannot simply cease all commercial activity without notice." "Actually," replied the Council's legal advisor, "they can. All human contracts included proper termination clauses. They followed galactic law precisely." The Ethereal Collective's representative flickered angrily. "Then we demand they resume trade immediately." "On what grounds?" asked the legal advisor. "No species is required to engage in commerce against their will." This created an uncomfortable silence. The galactic legal framework that the Council had used to dismiss human territorial claims now protected humanity's right to economic isolation. Chancellor Mextor, the Council's elected leader, tried to restore order. "Surely this is a misunderstanding. What are humanity's demands? What do they want?" But there were no demands. No ultimatums, no diplomatic communications at all. Humanity had simply vanished from galactic civilization overnight, taking their technology and trade relationships with them. In the Outer Rim territories, human colonies that had been abandoned or relocated suddenly reappeared on sensors. But when alien ships approached these worlds, they found them heavily fortified and completely unwilling to communicate. The governor of New Geneva, a human colony that had been forced to relocate 3 years earlier, sent a simple message to approaching Kethari ships. This world is under human protection. Depart immediately or face the consequences. When the Cathari ships ignored the warning and continued their approach, they discovered that the consequences were very real. The human colony was defended by weapon systems that the Cathari couldn't even identify, let alone counter. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy, a terrifying picture began to emerge. While the various alien species had been busy with politics and bureaucracy, humanity had been quietly preparing for this exact scenario. They had built alternate supply chains, hidden military installations, and evacuation protocols that could move entire populations overnight. The Council had always dismissed humanity as emotional and unpredictable. They had never considered that those same traits might make humans uniquely capable of long-term planning while maintaining perfect operational security. 3 months after the withdrawal began, Trade Minister Crickstill stood in his empty office on the Cathari homeworld, staring at supply reports that painted a grim picture. Industrial production was down 60%. 3 colonies had requested emergency food shipments. The Confederation's expansion fleet was grounded indefinitely. His assistant entered with another report. "Sir, we've detected human ships in the Vega system." "Doing what?" "Unknown. They're not responding to communication attempts." "But, sir, there are a lot of them." Crickstill closed his eyes. For 30 years, he had negotiated with humans from a position of assumed superiority. He had treated them as junior partners in galactic civilization, barely worth serious consideration. Now he was beginning to understand that humanity had never been the junior partner in anything. They had simply been waiting for the galaxy to show its true colors, and now that they had seen those colors, humanity was no longer interested in playing by the galaxy's rules. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the tactical display as 12 Zephyrian Hegemony ships approached the outer edge of the Sol system. The alien vessels were impressive by galactic standards. Each heavy cruiser stretched nearly 2 kilometers in length and carried enough firepower to level a continent. 3 months ago, such a fleet would have represented an unstoppable force against humanity. Today, Chen found himself almost feeling sorry for them. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim from the sensor station, "the Hegemony fleet is maintaining course for the asteroid belt. They're broadcasting standard territorial claim protocols." Chen nodded. Captain Vorthak was following the same playbook that had worked so well against human colonies for the past 50 years. Project overwhelming force, cite galactic law, and expect the humans to back down like they always had. The Zephyrians had no idea that they were flying into the galaxy's first demonstration of what humanity looked like when they stopped playing defense. "Signal the fleet," Chen ordered. "Begin deployment pattern Omega-7. Across the Sol system, ships that hadn't existed in any galactic database began moving. The first wave emerged from concealed positions throughout the asteroid belt. Sleek, destroyers that looked nothing like the bulky human vessels in alien intelligence files. They moved with an acceleration that should have been impossible for ships of their size. The second wave rose from the lunar surface. Massive dreadnoughts, each one larger than anything in the Zephyrian fleet, lifted off from hidden shipyards that had been disguised as mining facilities. Their hull configurations were completely unknown to galactic science, but the third wave was what made Chen smile. Ships began emerging from hyperspace around the Hegemony fleet, having jumped in with precision that galactic naval doctrine claimed was impossible. Within minutes, the 12 Zephyrian cruisers found themselves surrounded by over 200 human vessels. "Sir," Kim reported, "the Hegemony fleet has stopped. They're requesting communication." "Put them through," Chen replied. Captain Vorthak's image appeared on the main screen. The Zephyrian officer's usual arrogance had been replaced by barely controlled panic. His species had evolved from predators, and they recognized a trap when they saw one. "This is Captain Vorthak of the Zephyrian Hegemony. We are conducting lawful operations under galactic charter. You are interfering with our..." "Captain," Chen interrupted, his voice perfectly calm. "You are trespassing in human territory. You have 30 seconds to begin your withdrawal, or we will remove you." "Human territory? The asteroid belt is unclaimed space under our Redefining. 25 seconds. Vorthak's expression shifted from panic to desperate anger. "You cannot threaten Hegemony vessels. We have rights under galactic law." 15 seconds. The Zephyrian captain looked at his tactical display, where his 12 ships were hopelessly outnumbered. But more than the numbers, it was the technology that terrified him. His sensors couldn't even properly identify the human weapon systems. We are withdrawing, Vorthak finally said. Good choice, Chen replied. And Captain, next time you want to steal something from humanity, make sure you're strong enough to take it. The communication ended and Chen watched as the Hegemony fleet began its retreat. But he wasn't finished with the demonstration. Target their lead cruiser, he ordered. Fire a warning shot across their bow. The UES Defiance's main gun fired once. The energy beam lanced through space and struck an asteroid roughly the size of the Zephyrian cruiser. The rock simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. The Hegemony fleet's retreat became a full-speed run for the edge of the system. News of the encounter spread through galactic communication networks like wildfire. Within hours, every government in the galaxy was reviewing the sensor data and trying to understand what they had just witnessed. On the Cathari homeworld, military, Intelligence Director Zethkar was briefing the Confederation Council on humanity's sudden technological leap. The ships don't match any known design principles, he reported, his forearms gesturing at holographic displays. Their acceleration rates suggest reactionless drives that shouldn't be possible with known physics. Their weapon output exceeds our heaviest dreadnoughts by a factor of 10. How long have they had this technology? Asked Chancellor Krixvel. That's the disturbing part, Zethkar replied. Based on the construction patterns we can detect, some of these ships are decades old. They've been building this fleet in secret for at least 30 years. Silence filled the council chamber as the implications sank in. For 30 years, while the Cathari had been dismissing humans as junior partners in galactic civilization, humanity had been building a military force that could challenge any power in the galaxy. Similar scenes played out across known space. The ethereal collective discovered that their intelligence estimates of human military capability had been off by several orders of magnitude. The Valthic Confederation realized that the primitive mining stations in human space had actually been weapon platforms all along. But the real shock came when long-range sensors detected the true scope of humanity's transformation. Mars, which galactic intelligence had listed as a minor agricultural world, had been converted into the largest shipbuilding facility anyone had ever seen. The entire planet was essentially one massive industrial complex, protected by orbital defenses that made planetary assault impossible. Luna had been hollowed out and turned into a fortress that bristled with weapons capable of sterilizing entire fleets. Jupiter's moons hosted manufacturing facilities that were producing warships at a rate that defied belief. Even Earth itself had changed. The primitive homeworld was surrounded by orbital installations that could generate energy shields large enough to protect the entire planet. The most disturbing discovery came from deep space monitoring stations. Human ships were appearing throughout the galaxy, not as raiders or conquerors, but as protectors. Worlds that had been forced to relocate human colonies suddenly found themselves under the protection of mysterious human fleets. On Kepler 442b, the human families who had been displaced just months earlier were back. But they weren't alone. The planet was now defended by a human battle group that made it clear any attempt to remove the colonists again would be met with devastating force. Governor Patricia Wells of New Geneva addressed the returning colonists via hologram from the planet's new orbital defense station. For 50 years, we accepted displacement because we thought it was the price of galactic citizenship. We were wrong. The galaxy doesn't respect weakness. It only respects strength. The projection showed her surrounded by weapons consoles and tactical displays. We're not here to conquer anyone. We're not here to impose our will on other species. But we're done being pushed around. The message was broadcast on all galactic frequencies, ensuring that every government in known space received it. In the outer rim, human fleets began appearing at contested worlds where refugee populations struggled to survive. But these weren't conquest fleets. They were humanitarian missions backed by overwhelming military force. The Aquarian refugee camps on Sigma Draconis, where millions had fled from corporate wars, suddenly found themselves receiving human medical supplies and food shipments. When Aquarian corporate security forces tried to interfere, they discovered that the cargo ships were escorted by human destroyers that treated corporate threats with barely concealed contempt. Captain Elena Rodriguez, of the UES Mercy addressed the corporate security fleet from her escort ship. These people are under human protection now. You can leave, or you can be removed. Choose quickly. The corporate fleet chose to leave. Similar incidents occurred throughout the galaxy. Wherever suffering existed that could be alleviated with force or resources, human ships appeared. They didn't ask for permission from local governments. They didn't seek approval from the Galactic Council. They simply acted, backed by military power that made opposition futile. The galaxy began to understand that humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics hadn't been a tantrum or a negotiating tactic. It had been a strategic repositioning. While alien governments had been busy with bureaucracy and procedure, humanity had been building the capability to solve problems through direct action. On the Galactic Council Station, Chancellor Mextor called another emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Chamber, but the atmosphere was very different from 3 months earlier. "We need to address the human situation," Mextor announced. "Their military actions are destabilizing the established order." "What military actions?" asked the Aquarian representative. "They've attacked no one. They've invaded no territory. They're simply protecting their interests." "They're ignoring galactic law," protested the Cathari delegate. "As is their right," replied the Council's legal advisor. "No species is required to participate in galactic governance." The ethereal collective's representative flickered with agitation. "They're undermining our authority." "What authority?" asked the Hiraki delegate. "Half our military budgets depend on human technology we can no longer obtain. Our trade networks are collapsing without human commerce. They don't need to undermine our authority, we're doing that ourselves." The uncomfortable truth was settling over the galaxy like a fog. For 50 years, galactic civilization had functioned on the assumption that humanity needed them more than they needed humanity. The withdrawal had revealed the opposite was true. The galaxy needed humanity. Humanity apparently didn't need the galaxy at all. And now that they had shown their teeth, it was becoming clear that humanity had never been the prey animal the galaxy thought they were. They had been the apex predator, waiting patiently for the right moment to remind everyone else what the food chain actually looked like. The first domino fell on Cathari Prime when the Confederation's Third Fleet, mutinied Admiral Korthlex, had been ordered to patrol the border with Valthek space, a routine mission that had been carried out without incident for decades. But when his fleet arrived at the contested border zone, they found Valthek ships desperately fighting off raiders from the Savage Reach. The Valthek fleet was outgunned and losing badly. Standard Cathari protocol was clear: maintain neutral position and monitor the situation. But Admiral Korthlex's ships hadn't received spare parts for their weapon systems in 4 months, and his crews were growing increasingly angry about the supply shortages caused by humanity's withdrawal. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the Valthek flagship is requesting assistance. Their shields are failing." Korthlex stared at the tactical display. The Valthek Confederation had voted to support the Zephyrian claim to human asteroid mining rights just months earlier. Their suffering was a direct result of supporting the policies that had driven humanity away. But the Valthek crews didn't make those political decisions. They were just trying to survive. "All ships," Korthlex ordered, "engage the raiders. Drive them back to the Reach." His communications officer looked shocked. "Sir, we don't have authorization to—" "I'm giving the authorization," Korthlex replied. "If the Confederation Council wants to court-martial me for defending our neighbors, they can do it after we save some lives." The Cathari Third Fleet engaged the raiders and drove them off. But when Admiral Korthlex returned to Cathari Prime, he found himself facing a very different reception than he expected. Instead of a court-martial, he found cheering crowds. Cathari citizens had watched the battle on news feeds, and for the first time in months, they had seen their military doing something decisive instead of sitting in committees debating supply shortages. The Confederation Council found itself in an impossible position. They couldn't punish Korthlex without admitting that they preferred political procedure to military effectiveness. But they also couldn't reward him without acknowledging that their careful diplomatic approach was failing. The crisis deepened when reports came in from across Cathari space. Other fleet commanders were making their own decisions about border security, trade protection, and refugee assistance. The careful chain of command that had held the Confederation together for centuries was breaking down. On Valthek Prime, the situation was even worse. The Confederation's ruling council had split into three factions: those who wanted to formally apologize to humanity and beg for resumed trade, those who wanted to form a military alliance to force humanity back to the negotiating table, and those who wanted to abandon centralized government entirely and let individual worlds negotiate their own deals. The paralysis at the top was creating chaos throughout Valtech space. When human cargo ships appeared in the system offering to trade medical supplies for raw materials, some Valtech colonies accepted immediately. Others demanded that all trade go through official channels that no longer functioned. The result was a patchwork of conflicting policies that made coherent governance impossible. The Zephyrian hegemony faced the most dramatic collapse. Their entire expansion strategy had been based on claiming territory through legal challenges, while backing those claims with military force. But humanity's demonstration in the Sol system had proven that the hegemony's military superiority was an illusion. Worse, their economy was collapsing. 60% of their manufacturing capacity had depended on human-designed quantum processors. Without replacement parts, their production lines were shutting down one by one. Chancellor Vextor of the Hegemony called an emergency meeting of the ruling council, but half the members didn't show up. They were too busy dealing with crisis in their own territories. "We need to reach out to humanity," Vextor announced to the delegates who had bothered to attend. "We need to negotiate a return to normal trade relationships." "On what basis?" asked General Mordak, the Hegemony's military commander. "They've made it clear they don't recognize our authority. What can we offer them that they can't take by force?" This question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For the first time in Hegemony history, their leaders were forced to consider that they might not be the strongest power in their region of space. The psychological impact was devastating. The Hegemony's entire identity was built on the concept of strength through expansion. If they couldn't expand, if they couldn't even hold what they already had, then what were they? The answer came when the Hegemony's outer rim colonies began declaring independence. Without military protection or economic support from the core worlds, the colonies saw no benefit in remaining part of a failing empire. The first to break away was New Zephyr, a mining world that had been producing rare earth elements for the Hegemony fleet. When Hegemony ships arrived to reassert control, they found the planet defended by human vessels. The human fleet commander's message was brief. New Zephyr has requested protection under the Mutual Defense Compact. Any attempt to use force against this world will be considered an act of war against humanity. The Hegemony fleet withdrew without firing a shot. Within weeks, a dozen more colonies had declared independence and requested human protection. The 1,000-year-old Zephyrian hegemony was fracturing before its leaders' eyes. The crisis reached the Galactic Council when ethereal collective ships attacked a human medical convoy in the Vega system. The attack was justified as interdiction of smuggling, but everyone knew the real reason. The collective was desperate to get their hands on human medical technology. The convoy was carrying supplies to a refugee camp on Vega 7th, where survivors from the Hegemony's collapsing colonies were struggling to survive. The ethereal ships disabled 2 freighters and began boarding them to seize the medical supplies. They made a critical error. They assumed the convoy was undefended. The human escort ships had been running silent, their advanced stealth systems making them invisible to ethereal sensors. When the boarding began, they revealed themselves. Captain Maria Santos of the UES Guardian addressed the ethereal fleet commander. "You have attacked vessels engaged in humanitarian relief. You will release the freighters and withdraw immediately, or we will destroy you." The ethereal commander, confident in his technological superiority, refused. "These supplies are being diverted from legitimate medical channels. We are acting under galactic health regulations." "Last warning," Santos replied. The ethereal commander cut the communication and ordered his ships to prepare for combat. He was commanding 6 heavy cruisers against 3 human escorts. The odds seemed overwhelming in his favor. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, the entire ethereal fleet had been reduced to drifting wreckage. The human ships hadn't even been scratched. News of the battle reached the Galactic Council within hours. For the first time in galactic history, a major powers fleet had been completely destroyed by another member species. Chancellor Mextor called an emergency session. But when the council convened, they discovered that over half the member species had failed to send representatives. The Hegemony was too busy dealing with rebellion. The Confederation was paralyzed by internal disputes. The collective was trying to figure out how they had lost 6 heavy cruisers, to 3 escort ships. The species that did attend were in no mood for lengthy debate. "We need to address the human situation immediately," Mextor announced. "What situation?" asked the Aquarian representative. "They defended a medical convoy from pirates. That's exactly what we should want responsible species to do." "They destroyed ethereal vessels," protested the remaining collective delegate. "The ethereal vessels attacked first," replied the Hiraki representative. "The humans were defending themselves." "This is exactly the problem," Mextor said desperately. "Humanity is acting outside our authority. They're making military decisions without consulting the Council." "Maybe," suggested the Aquarian delegate, "the problem isn't that humanity is acting without our authority. Maybe the problem is that our authority doesn't work." The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. For 1,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace through careful diplomacy and bureaucratic procedure. The system had worked because all major powers had agreed to participate. But now the most technologically advanced and militarily powerful species in the galaxy had walked away from the system entirely. And instead of collapsing, they had thrived worse. They were demonstrating that problems could be solved much more effectively, through direct action than through committees and procedures. The refugee crisis that the Council had been studying for 3 years was being resolved by human ships in 3 months. Border disputes that had generated decades of legal arguments were being settled by human mediation, backed by overwhelming force. The Outer Rim territories, which had been plagued by piracy and corporate exploitation for centuries, were becoming peaceful and prosperous under human protection. "We're losing relevance," admitted the Hiraki delegate. "Species are bypassing the Council entirely and going directly to humanity for solutions." It was true. The Council's communication networks were filled with requests from minor species asking for human intervention in local conflicts. They weren't seeking galactic mediation anymore. They wanted results. The meeting dissolved in acrimony, with no resolution reached and no clear path forward. Meanwhile, on the UES Defiance, Admiral Chen was reviewing reports from across the galaxy. The picture they painted was clear. The old galactic order was collapsing, and something new was taking its place. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving formal requests for assistance from 18 different species. They're asking for protection, trade agreements, and military support." Chen studied the list. These weren't the major powers that had dominated galactic politics for centuries. They were smaller species colonies and independent worlds that had been ignored or exploited by the old system. "What's our response?" the officer asked. Chen thought about Elena Vasquez's message that had started this cascade of events. Humanity had withdrawn from a system that didn't respect them. But they hadn't withdrawn from the galaxy entirely. "Send a message to Earth," he ordered. "Tell them it's time for the next phase." The galaxy was about to discover that humanity hadn't just been preparing for war. They had been preparing to build something better. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics, Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to the Galactic Council Station. But she was not the same woman who had left in frustration and despair. She wore the uniform of a fleet admiral now, and she arrived aboard the UES Sovereign, humanity's newest flagship. The massive vessel dwarfed every other ship docked at the station. Its sleek black hull seemed to absorb light, and weapon ports along its sides could be seen even by casual observers. This was not a ship built for exploration or trade. This was a ship built to end arguments. Flanking the Sovereign were 12 other vessels, each representing a different species that had signed humanity's mutual respect accords. The Hiraki cruiser. Determination floated alongside the Aquarian destroyer New Hope. A Valthek medical ship carried refugees who were being relocated to safer worlds under human protection. Security Chief Glex Tar, who had processed humanity's departure a year earlier, watched the arrival with a mixture of awe and dread. The humans weren't returning as supplicants seeking readmission to galactic society. They were returning as conquerors who had already built their own. Elena walked through the station corridors with a confidence that hadn't been there before. The pristine halls and flowing architecture that had once impressed her now seemed fragile and artificial. She had seen what could be built when function mattered more than appearance. Behind her walked representatives from the 18 species that had joined humanity's alternative to the Galactic Council. They called it the Mutual Respect Compact, and its structure was radically different from the bureaucratic maze that had dominated galactic politics for centuries. The compact had no permanent leadership. Decisions were made by direct vote, with each member species getting equal representation regardless of size or military power. Disputes were resolved through binding arbitration, with human naval forces available to enforce the decisions if necessary. Most importantly, the compact focused on action rather than procedure. Where the Galactic Council might spend years debating refugee assistance, the compact could mobilize relief efforts within days. The results spoke for themselves. The refugee crisis that had plagued the Outer Rim for decades was essentially solved. Piracy had been eliminated from compact space through aggressive patrol actions. Trade disputes were resolved quickly and fairly, with human military power ensuring that all parties honored their agreements. Elena entered the council chamber and found it much changed from the last time she had been there. The great circular room that had once held representatives from over 60 species now hosted fewer than 30. The rest had either joined the compact or been too damaged by internal conflicts to maintain their council membership. Chancellor Mextor looked older and more tired than Elena remembered. The strain of holding together a fragmenting galactic government showed in every line of his face. Ambassador Vasquez, he said formally. Or should I say, Admiral Vasquez, the Council is pleased to see humanity return to galactic politics. We never left galactic politics, Elena replied, taking her seat in the human section. We just stopped participating in your version of it. The words hit the chamber like a challenge. Around the room, representatives from the remaining council species shifted uncomfortably. The power dynamics had changed completely and everyone knew it. The council requests clarification on humanity's current position, Mextor continued. Are you seeking readmission to galactic governance? Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Chancellor, we're not here to rejoin anything. We're here to inform you of the new reality. She stood and activated a holographic display that showed the current political map of the galaxy. Large sections that had once been colored with the emblems of council species now showed the star and tree symbol of the Mutual Respect Compact 18. Species have already joined the compact, Elena announced. 12 more have formally requested membership. The compact now controls over 40% of galactic trade routes and 30% of inhabited systems. The numbers were devastating. The Galactic Council was no longer the dominant political force in known space. It was just one power block among several, and not even the largest one. Furthermore, Elena continued, the compact has established permanent trade and defense agreements with 16 independent worlds that were previously unaligned. These worlds chose to align with us rather than seek council membership. The implications were clear. Species that might once have sought to join the Galactic Council were now choosing humanity's alternative instead. Ambassador Thrixavel of the Kethari, the same alien who had dismissed human territorial claims a year earlier, spoke up from his position in the diminished Confederation section. Admiral, the Confederation would like to discuss the possibility of joining the compact. The words hung in the air like a surrender. The Kethari Confederation, one of the founding members of the Galactic Council, was asking to join humanity's rival organization. The compact is always open to species that demonstrate genuine commitment to mutual respect, Elena replied. However, membership requires acceptance of compact arbitration for all territorial disputes. That includes retroactive review of all territorial claims made in the past 5 years. Thrixvel's expression went pale. The Confederation had made dozens of territorial claims in the past 5 years, most of them at humanity's expense. Compact arbitration would likely reverse most of those decisions. That's unacceptable, Thrixvel stammered. Then don't join, Elena replied calmly. No one is forcing you. This was the genius of humanity's approach. They weren't conquering the galaxy through force. They were offering a better alternative and letting species choose for themselves. But the choice came with real consequences. The Zephyrian Hegemony's representative, one of the few officials from that collapsing government still able to attend council sessions, spoke up desperately. Surely some accommodation can be reached. The Hegemony has valuable resources and strategic positions to offer. Elena turned to face him. Admiral Vextal, 3 months ago, Hegemony forces attempted to seize the medical supplies intended for refugee camps. Before that, you claimed mining rights to humanity's home system. What exactly do you think you have to offer us? The question was rhetorical and everyone knew it. The Hegemony had nothing to offer, because they had built their entire civilization on taking what they wanted from weaker species. Now that they faced a stronger opponent, they had no other tools available. The compact's position is simple, Elena announced to the chamber. We will trade with any species that treats us fairly. We will defend any world that requests our protection. We will mediate disputes for anyone who accepts our arbitration. But we will not tolerate aggression, and we will not accept second-class treatment. She gestured to the representative sitting behind her. These species understand that mutual respect means exactly that. Mutual. They don't get to dismiss our territorial claims while expecting us to honor theirs. They don't get to block our trade while demanding access to our technology. Chancellor Mextor tried to restore some semblance of diplomatic protocol. The Council has always been committed to fair treatment of all member species. No, Elena said firmly. The Council has been committed to maintaining the status quo. There's a difference. She activated another holographic display, this one showing economic data from across the galaxy. Compact space has experienced 30% economic growth in the past year. Average living standards have improved across all member species. Trade disputes are resolved in an average of 2 weeks instead of 2 years. Military conflicts have decreased by 70% in areas under compact protection. The data was undeniable. Humanity's alternative to the Galactic Council wasn't just different. It was demonstrably better. Meanwhile, Elena continued, Council space has experienced economic decline, increased conflict, and governmental instability. 3 founding members have lost effective control of their own territory. 2 more are in active civil war. The accusations stung because they were true. The old galactic order was collapsing, not because of external attack, but because it had never actually worked very well. The ethereal collective's remaining representative flickered with what Elena had learned to recognize as desperation. What are your terms for Council species to join the Compact? There are no special terms, Elena replied. The same standards apply to everyone. Respect for territorial integrity, fair trade practices, and acceptance of arbitration for disputes. If Council species can meet those standards, they're welcome to apply for membership. The simplicity was what made it so devastating. Humanity wasn't demanding tribute or submission. They were just demanding to be treated fairly. The fact that this seemed impossible for many Council species said everything about what kind of organization the Council had become. As the session continued, it became clear that the galaxy had already chosen. Species after species announced their intention to apply for compact membership. Others requested trade agreements or defense partnerships. By the end of the day, only 8 species remained committed to the old Council structure. The 1,000-year-old institution that had once ruled half the galaxy was reduced to a regional power block. Elena prepared to leave, but Chancellor Mextor called out to her. Admiral, what happens to the Council? What happens to the principles we've built galactic civilization on? Elena paused at the chamber entrance and looked back at the nearly empty seats. Chancellor, the Council's principles were noble. Peace through cooperation, prosperity through trade, security through mutual defense. Those are good principles. She gestured to the holographic display still showing the Compact's success. We just found a better way to implement them. As Elena walked back to her ship, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a frustrated diplomat watching humanity get pushed around by species that saw them as weak. Today, she was the representative of the most powerful alliance in the galaxy, and that alliance was built on the simple principle that strength should be used to protect others, not exploit them. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength was never their adaptability or their technology. It was their willingness to walk away from a system that didn't work and build something better. And they had built something better, not through conquest or domination, but by demonstrating that mutual respect and direct action could accomplish more than 1,000 years of committees and bureaucracy. The old galactic order was dead. The new one was just beginning. As the UES Sovereign departed the Council station, it carried with it the knowledge that the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had abandoned diplomacy and thrown the Galactic Council into chaos. In return, they had built something far more valuable. A galaxy where strength protected the weak instead of exploiting them, where disputes were resolved through action instead of endless debate, and where every species could stand with dignity as equals. It was the galaxy humanity had always wanted to be part of. They had just needed to build it themselves.